This is the Sports Bash Warm-Up with Josh Hennig on 97.3 ESPN. Now, live inside the Matt Black Kia Studios, here's Josh Hennig.
Ladies and gentlemen, we have survived. It's been 4+ months of no sports. Well, team sports in that matter. You know, baseball was supposed to open their season back in March, and tonight is the official opening day. Ladies and gentlemen, we have survived. We have made it. We are here. Opening day. I tweeted this out earlier. Think about this for a hot minute. So when it comes to sports right now, tonight is opening day for Major League Baseball. Tomorrow is the Phillies opener and the first Sixers scrimmage. This coming Tuesday is the Flyers' first exhibition game. Next Thursday, the NBA returns. Next Saturday is the official start of the NHL round robin. Sports are back. And now is the time to stop binging your Netflix shows, to, back off whatever you're consuming on Hulu and Disney Plus and Amazon Prime. You got to start carving out time in your schedule because sports are back on your TV. Josh Hennig here on 97.3 ESPN. This is the warm-up. Text board is open as always, 609-403-0973. To get on the conversation, 609-403-0973. Coming up, to talk some hockey with us at 125, Scott Laughlin of SiriusXM NHL Radio. He's our morning show host over there. We'll talk to him about the NHL returning, his perspective on the Flyers. We'll get into the logistics of the bubble cities for Toronto and Edmonton. And we got a lot to get to this hour. 609-403-0973. The Phillies have made an announcement. Their opening day roster. The problem with their announcement is that it's 29 players. That's right. You're supposed to have a 30-man roster. They announced a roster with 29 names. Now, a little bit of news here. So, pitchers Sir Anthony Dominguez, Dave Robertson, Ranger Suarez, they're all starting the year on the injured list. Austin Davis, Tommy Hunter, Scott Kingery, Hector Neris, they are all active and ready to go for opening day tomorrow. One name missing from this press release. Hunter Brody's favorite Philly right now, Phil Gosselin. It looks like, if you believe the reports by guys like Todd Zalecki of MLB.com as well as Bob Wankel, that Phil Gosselin will be the final player on the 30-man roster. Phillies tomorrow, Aaron Nola, opening day starter for the third straight year. By the way, Bob Wankel from Crossing Broad, the Phillies writer and reporter, is going to join Mike Gill and Hunter Brody coming up at 5 o'clock here on 97.3 ESPN. And one of the things that stands out to me the most about this Phillies roster announcement is all the left-handers. You have 4 left-handers on this roster: Jose Alvarez, Austin Davis, Cole Irvin, and Adam Morgan. So do not be surprised if the Phillies do a lot of matchups with their bullpen this year, especially with a former catcher like Joe Girardi, who has a unique and intricate understanding of the game of baseball. I think sometimes we forget that when you have a player like Girardi, and this is something that we've talked about over at 97.3 ESPN.com as well, about how Joe Girardi looks at the game of baseball. This is a guy, when you have played catcher, you are managing the pitching staff. You see the game through a set of eyes that sees the entire scope of the field. You have a manager who's managed in both the National and the American League. You have a manager who's actually been an all-star as a player. He was an all-star catcher with the Chicago Cubs years ago. He's coming in there with a pitching coach and Brian Price, a coaching staff that is arguably one of the strongest in baseball. I don't think it's far-fetched for us to sit around and say, you know what, the Phillies have a legitimate chance of making the playoffs. Now, a lot of it depends on who gets started hot, who doesn't get started hot. But there's still a possibility for them to make the playoffs. And I think it's a better possibility than last year. And it's not just because of the manager. It's because a lot of the players that you're going to be depending on are a year older and technically should be a year more improved. Whether it's Scott Kingery, whether it's a guy like Adam Haseley, whether it's a pitcher like Zach Eflin or Nick Pivetta or Vince Velasquez, the growth of these players, even Aaron Nola, is going to be vital to baseball. And furthermore, if they get this plan through, as was reported late last night, Major League Baseball and the MLBPA are discussing expanding the postseason from 10 to 16. You could almost guarantee the Phillies are making the playoffs if they expand to 16. In fact, if you're a sports bettor and you believe that they're going to make this thing go from 10 to 16, you might want to place a bet right now that the Phillies are going to make the playoffs. Because if they expand to 16, those odds are going to completely change across the board for those sports betting apps. Whether it's DraftKings or PlaySugarHouse.com, whatever your platform is, you might want to get in on that action. Because a Phillies team, if they can stay healthy and all things are equal between them and the rest of baseball, I cannot overlook the reality of how huge it will be to have a 60-game season, and if Bryce Harper gets hot and Gregorius plays the way we expect him to, this Phillies team can really make some noise. And that's exciting. Again, opening day today, Major League Baseball. You can hear the game tonight here on 97.3 ESPN of the Yankees and the Nationals. Max Scherzer versus Garrett Cole. Right here on 97.3 ESPN. Coverage begins at 6 o'clock tonight. So right after the Sports Bash is done, you go right in to Yankees Nationals. Text board is open, 609-403-0973. By the way, also the news came out last night that you have Zach Wheeler, who Chavez gave birth this week, so he will be available this weekend. So that's some cool news. That's some good news for the Phillies and great news for him. Congratulations to him. So are you excited about baseball? You excited about sports coming back? What about sports are you excited being back? Text board is open, 609-403-0973. A couple other news items that popped up today already. In the NHL, and we'll talk with Scott Laughlin more about this a little bit later, the Seattle team has announced their team name. They will be called the Seattle Kraken. I like the name. I think it's a cool-looking logo. Mike Gill pointed out that the color scheme reminds him, is very similar to the Seattle Mariners, so that's a little nice homage staying in the city. A lot of cities have that tendency where they keep similar color schemes to their sibling teams in other sports. Like, look at the city of Pittsburgh. The Pirates and the Steelers and the Penguins all basically have the same color scheme in some way across the board. You look at a team, for example, like the Mets and the Knicks have a similar color scheme as well, along with the Islanders. They all got that blue and orange going on thing with a little bit, the blue, orange, and white going on. So it's kind of cool seeing that Seattle kind of keeps with some of that tradition that other cities have, where similar color schemes, similar setups for their setups. That's pretty cool. We'll talk with Scott Laughlin more about that from SiriusXM NHL Radio coming up at 1:25. The Washington football team announced that for the 2020 season, they're going to be called the Washington football team. Yeah, it's good. It's good to know that they're really on top of things down there in DC. Yeah. In the wake of all the scandal that's happened down there in DC and how they handled, or shall I say not handled, any of it, I think it's utterly hilarious that they're just going to go for the season and be called the Washington football team. Now, according to reports, there's some legal issues why they haven't been able to lock in on a team name, because there's a guy out there that trademarked a ton of names, and there's a legal issue battle going on over that. But the point is that it feels like Washington, it's almost like they're just trying to survive 2020. They're just trying to get out of this without making any more mistakes. You're an NFL franchise, and you're going to be called the Washington football team. I mean, what is this, MLS? Where we don't even have a team name. We just call you Sporting Kansas City, or Cincinnati FC, the Cincinnati Football Club. I mean, come on. I understand that's a tradition in soccer and in FIFA over in Europe, but it just feels like such a weak move by the Washington football team. We're going to be the Washington football team for this year. And they're also going to keep the current color scheme in place. They're just going to put instead of the logo on the helmet, we replace with the player's number. So it'll also look like a college football team, or one of those throwback uniforms from like the 1960s. Again, it just feels like the Washington's football team is just such a wacky mess down there. I don't think it's a horrible idea, but I think there's a whole lot better way they could have handled all this. But we shouldn't be surprised, because Daniel Snyder doesn't know how to handle his own business properly anyway, so we shouldn't be surprised. Text board is open, 609-403-0973. The other news that's popped over the last night into today is the NBA bubble court is pretty sweet. And I would make the argument that the NBA so far actually has the best television presentation for a game. I think it's better than any other sports entity right now. Because when you're watching those soccer games, those MLS games, listen, it does look a little barren. It does look a little empty at times. And I understand they try to use the advertisers around the field to make up for, but it doesn't do enough. I think that the Premier League does an okay job, them and Bundesliga, with the covering the stands with an advertisement. I mean, it's a solid move. It's not great, but it's a solid move. Baseball is definitely going to look weird with the cardboard cutouts and nobody in the stands. The NBA got it right. The NBA literally created a product just for TV. The product in that arena is not for anyone else except for the players being able to play and you at home watching. And I think it's incredible. The whole huge backdrop of the huge graphic that would be in the sky in a regular arena. In the regular arena, you look at the Jumbotron and you get all the graphics and all the pictures and everything. Now it's behind all the players in the backdrop. That's a cool look. I like the fact that the way they outline the court, they're basically cutting off from you seeing anything unnecessary. A little bit like the UFC does with the lighting in the arena. They have the lighting in the arena for the UFC fights so that you don't have to see anything that shouldn't be seen as much as possible. Whereas the NBA is doing the same thing. They have the cameras set up so that you don't see anything extra unless, it's just totally by accident. I think that's an incredible job. I think that the overall layout of the court and the play, it's going to be a lot of fun to watch. Now, the one thing that is going to have to be overcome, though, is the reality that a lot of these broadcast teams are not always going to be at the stadium, at the arena. And that can present some very interesting issues. So for anybody who's watched the KBO baseball, they know that ESPN has the broadcasters like Boog Sciambi and others. They did this on Sunday Night Baseball as well. They're broadcasting from their houses. Chipper Jones was in his house. Eduardo Perez was in his house. Boog Sciambi's in his house. According to Joe Buck, Fox is going to do a similar thing where Joe Buck and John Smoltz are not going to be in the stadium. They're going to be broadcasting from remote studios separately. Joe Buck's going to be in a studio over there in Colorado, and then John Smoltz is going to be at the MLB Network studios in New Jersey. We're also seeing that there's going to be a lot of the local broadcasters that won't be on site. We know that, for example, for away games, baseball broadcasters not always going to be traveling with the team. We know in the NBA bubble, they're only letting a handful of people into the bubble anyway. So you will not have, someone like Mark Zumoff in the bubble, right? He'll be broadcasting remotely on television, which means the same thing for radio. They're obviously not going to have the radio guys like Tom McGinnis, sitting there, being quarantined. So it's going to be a completely different layout and sound of the broadcast. Not that that's going to be a bad thing, but it definitely will take some adjusting because, as I said, watching the games that I've watched, like, for example, the MLS, those announcers and broadcasters are back in ESPN studios in Bristol. It just is a different sound. It's not a bad sound. It's a different sound. And there are times where it seems like they're reacting at a different pace than you're used to. Not that they're delayed, but the pacing is definitely different because there's a feel to a broadcast when it's live at a game with fans in the stand compared to not being in the building. So I think it's going to definitely take some getting used to. But at the end of the day, as long as there's sports on, do we really care about how different the broadcast is? I certainly don't. I just find it interesting how these little differences between each sport. Now, with the way that the NBA is doing it, I'm curious to see what the NHL does. Because the NHL is going to be similar to the NBA, which is going to be in these hub cities. They're not traveling from arena to arena like baseball is. They're not going to be doing anything that has to do with logistics or anything except for just go to the ice, leave. That's it. So you have to wonder, does the NHL try to do a similar setup that is a more TV-friendly product like the NBA is doing? Because the NBA, hands down, is the best version we've seen. The NBA setup is just incredible. And just for a couple exhibition games, it looks really sweet. By the way, Sixers exhibition tomorrow. First one, 4:30, right here on 97.3 ESPN. We're bringing you all the Sixers exhibition games. So we got a game, first one tomorrow, 3:30 p.m., right here on 97.3 ESPN. Tom McGinnis brings you all the Sixers action as the NBA resumes. The other news item today that I wanted to get to before we hit the break, some good news, speaking of the NHL. Carter Hart, back on the ice, back at practice. He is out there. He's in the pads. He's working back and forth. It's good news. So apparently those back spasms were not too bad. And I think that's a good sign because, let's be realistic, the one guy you don't want to lose for the Flyers is Carter Hart. Now, I don't expect them to, overreach and do anything unnecessary when it comes to Carter Hart. I don't think they're going to overextend him or try to make him play every minute of the exhibition game coming up on Tuesday versus the Penguins. But I do think that if he's healthy, they might give him some action in that game. Maybe he plays a period, then Brian Elliott plays a period, and then maybe Alex Lyons, who's the third goalie, maybe you throw him out there for a period just to give all three goalies some work because you want to make sure that everybody gets enough work in before the season actually starts when guys will get less work because of just how the rotations are going to be. That's at least how I would do it. By the way, you could hear the Flyers exhibition game coming up as well here on 97.3 ESPN. That's this coming Tuesday at 4 p.m. We got you covered all over the place right here on 97.3 ESPN. So we got a lot of sports coming up, a lot of things to keep an eye on. Again, opening night is tonight, Sixers tomorrow. Flyers coming up on Tuesday, as well as the Sixers as well. All leading you up to next weekend. Pretty much, when it comes to sports, you better get ready. I told you earlier when I opened the show. Whatever you're watching on Netflix and Hulu and Amazon Prime and Disney Plus, you better make sure you have all your T's crossed and I's dotted with your shows, because when sports returns, it's going to be a blitzkrieg. You are going to get blasted, and it's going to be awesome. But you got to be ready for it. You know, you can't be so ensconced with your other stuff that you might miss something. Let's be realistic. This is something we've never seen before. The world is in the middle of a pandemic, and sports are coming back, and it's going to be very different. I mean, people are literally watching the fact that Tom Brady arrived at the Bucs facility today to get his testing. That's where we're at. I mean, this whole world is going to be crazy to watch. So we'll get into all that and more coming up here on the Warm Up 97.3 ESPN. Coming up next, Scott Laughlin, SiriusXM NHL Radio. We'll get more details from him about what is going on with the Hub Cities, his perspective on the Flyers, and more right here on the Warm Up on 97.3 ESPN. I'm Josh Hennig, hanging out with you. I want to remind you that this week, as the last few weeks, we got another Seize the Deal opportunity for you right now. 97.3 ESPN has teamed up with Seize the Deal for an incredible weekly offer. And this week, you can get a $50 gift card at Dockside Cafe for just half the price. That's right, $50 for half the price. Dockside Cafe on South Green Street on the historic Tuckerton Creek. The deal goes live tomorrow at 9 a.m. Tomorrow at 9 a.m., you can get this Seize the Deal awesome opportunity. $50 gift card to Dockside Cafe for just $25. For more information, tap on the 97.3 ESPN mobile app. Josh Hennig back here on the warm-up 97.3 ESPN. Text board is open as always. Get to them a little bit later this hour, 609-403-0973. But joining us now on the Boardwalk Honda Hotline, Scott Laughlin, SiriusXM NHL Radio. Joins us to talk some NHL bubble and more right now. Scott, how you doing today?
Oh, I'm doing well, Josh. Great to be back with you.
Great to have you back on. So, first of all, I got to get your reaction to the Seattle Krakens. How do you feel about that?
I love it. I think it's a big day for them. It's a big day for the National Hockey League. I like the name. I like the logo. I like the sweaters and the renderings that we've had so far for the home and road sweaters. I think they've struck upon the great color scheme that seems to have worked fairly well for the Seahawks and for the Seattle Sounders out there in Major League Soccer and such. So I think this is a pretty big day for that franchise out there. And we just talked to Ron Francis a short time ago, their general manager. And, this is another step in the right direction towards that team taking the ice, the arena, the Climate Pledge Arena, which is going to be a state-of-the-art, environmentally friendly type arena, the first of its kind, is really starting to take shape as well. The old Key Arena roof is going to be left behind there for them to build around and from. So things are heading in the right direction for that franchise. They seem to be on track to start when they anticipated that they would start. And I think today was a pretty successful day all in all for the Seattle Kraken.
I'm curious, how quickly do you think that they will be competitive? Because a team like Vegas, they were competitive way quicker than someone like me expected. So, is that too much to expect from Seattle to do what Vegas did?
Yeah, I think it is, Josh. I think that was a once-in-a-lifetime type scenario that the Vegas Golden Knights took advantage of. And they had a very astute general manager, George McPhee, that knew how to work it. Not only was he going to select good players, but he worked the phones in advance of the expansion draft, and he picked up so many different assets for his organization, whether it be draft picks and or players. He not only got the players he wanted, but he was given more to stay away from certain players that previous team tried to protect in the draft. So George McPhee, I think, pulled the rug out from under a lot of fellow GMs back then right around the time the expansion draft was about to take place. And I think because of what George did, I think that Ron Francis is going to be up against it. He's not going to be able to do that. I don't think that NHL GMs are going to fall for that again. They're going to say, you know what? We've left 6 or 7 guys here that could play for you unprotected. Go to it. We're not going to give you a draft pick. We're not going to give you another player with which to entice you to stay away from a certain guy that we want to protect. So do with that what you will. That being said, I think $650 million these days, Josh, buys you some competitive things and aspects of your organization right off the hop. It's kind of what you buy into. I mean, the days, Josh, of the Washington Capitals being horrible in 74, 75, and the Ottawa Senators coming back into the early 1990s and just being abysmal, those days are long gone. Now you pay a certain price to get in. That's what Mr. Bonderman and Mr. Bruckheimer have done out there in Seattle, and I think they're going to get what they pay for. And what they're going to pay for, I think, Josh, is here a pretty competitive team right off the hop. I'm not saying playoffs. I'm certainly not saying Stanley Cup final like Vegas did, but I don't think that they're going to embarrass themselves. In fact, I think they're going to be quite successful off the hop.
Well, that's good to know because obviously, the more competitive the teams are, the better for the on-ice products. Speaking of the on-ice products, Scott, we are just now rounding in the form of the teams traveling to these 2 hub cities. And the last time you and I talked, they hadn't announced these hub cities yet. I'm curious from you, what are some of the logistics going to be for Edmonton and Toronto? Because, just on the ground, these are 2 very different cities.
No, absolutely. Look, I've been to both of these cities. I mean, I live just outside of Toronto now. I've pretty much lived here my entire life. So I've got as good a handle on the city of Toronto as anybody out there. And Edmonton I've been to a bunch of times over the years as well. And let's put it this way. Edmonton's a much better place to be at in the summertime than it is during the winter, of course, where the snowstorms can pop up there in northern Alberta. But look, I think the similarities here are the fact that, they're going to have the wherewithal, both in Toronto in the east and Edmonton in the west, to have a lot for these players to do. Now, that being said, though, Josh, we do have to take into consideration what has to happen here is players are going to be in this quote-unquote secure zone for up to 2 weeks. After 2 weeks, then they can go outside the quote-unquote secure zone that they've set up for these players, and that is they can expand a little bit and go get a round or 2 of golf, and if they want to do that, if they want to do some sightseeing, they'll be able to do that down the road. But the first couple of weeks, once they get to Toronto in the east and Edmonton in the west, it's going to be about basically quarantining, and all they're going to be doing is basically going from the hotel to the practice rink, to the Scotiabank Arena, or to the practice rink and to Rogers Place. And there are going to be some teams that will be in for a good time, not a long time. They won't be around for 2 weeks because, as we know, Josh, after 2 weeks is when we really get down to the playoffs and the round of 16, and the Flyers will be a big part of that certainly, and going forward and that sort of thing. So I think the first couple of weeks it's going to be about playing hockey and playing hockey only. After the first couple of weeks go by, then these players can start to do some extracurricular type activities. But they seem to have all the bases covered. Most importantly, I think they seem to have spent a lot of money on testing, and it's going to be pretty much something that players have to adhere to on a daily basis if they want to maintain this thing going forward.
Yeah, and speaking of that, we know that in the NBA bubble, once they got everybody to the bubble, they've had 0 tests. And whereas the NHL, it seems like every round of testing, they've gotten fewer and fewer positives. So it seems like at least the logistics for the NHL, like the NBA, are in line to make sure everyone is safe and everything's accounted for.
Well, you're right. I mean, the big thing here, phase 3, getting to phase 4, which is basically dropping the puck. I mean, part of phase 4 is initially going to be getting to the bubble coming up on Sunday. And you're right. These have been the times that we've all been concerned about, right? We're hearing that this player is unable to practice or unable to participate. A guy like Corey Crawford, the goaltender with the Chicago Blackhawks, once again today, just not on the ice. That's got to be of grave concern to the Blackhawks, who are thinking, if we're going to somehow upset the high-powered Edmonton Oilers, we need to have number 50, the guy who's won a couple of Stanley Cups, between the pipes for us. That right now seems to be in doubt because he's been unable to participate, unable to practice. He's had some concussion issues. You don't know if it's COVID-19 related. You don't know if it's muscle related, whatever the case may be. Corey Crawford has not been on the ice for the Blackhawks in training camp thus far. And again, when you look at where they're at now, every day goes by and he's not on the ice. You have to think that that's got to be a realistic situation where perhaps he doesn't play. against the Edmonton Oilers. And if he doesn't play against Edmonton, the Hawks have no chance to win that series. So you're right. I mean, this time here, in the days that have led up to going to the Hubs and jumping on these flights coming up on Sunday, they have been the nail-biting, nerve-wracking times, I think, for these NHL teams.
Speaking of getting back on the ice, you led me right into the next topic, which is the Flyers with Carter Hart. He was seen back on the ice today practicing, which is big news for the Flyers after he was reportedly missing time with those back spasms. How important in your mind is Carter Hart's play to the Flyers' success when they get back on the ice in this tournament?
Oh, it's absolutely huge, Josh. There's no question about that. I mean, Brian Elliott, to his credit, has done well in the backup role this season. When Carter Hart missed that time earlier in the campaign, there was Brian Elliott to at least keep the team competitive, if not win games for the Flyers. So credit to him as a veteran, reliable backup. But if you're going to make the run that Philadelphia hopes that they can make, it's going to be on the back of a guy like Carter Hart. He's had the resume. He's been biding his time. He's played in a couple of World Junior Hockey Championships. He had great numbers, of course, as all Flyers fans know, when he played out in the Western Hockey League there at Everett. He's the type of guy that just appears to be built for this type of situation, for this type of stage. I don't think this type of theater is going to overwhelm him. That said, he's got some back spasms he's been trying to bite through and to fight through. And the reality is, as we know, Josh, I mean, back spasms, they can be fleeting, right? I mean, you could have a back issue and it could, seize up on you 1 week, go away for a week or two, and all of a sudden flare up again. We certainly hope that's not going to be the case with number 79, but I think Carter Hart just holds all the keys to what Philadelphia hopes to do here. I like what Couturier's done this season. Konechny, you still got the old reliable Claude Giroux, the old reliable Jake Voracek as well to lead the offense up front. But it's not incumbent on those guys to do it now that Couturier and Konechny in particular have stepped forward. And again, it was interesting yesterday to hear Chuck Fletcher not officially rule out the fact that a guy like Oscar Lindblom, congratulations to the great story that Oscar Lindblom has been. He gets the new 3-year contract. But it was interesting to hear Chuck not officially kind of rule him out. In fact, he almost seemed like on the conference call yesterday that they were really toying with the idea of making him a part of the 31 players that will make up this postseason roster.
Yeah, that's been a huge story around here. I mean, just the fact that he's overcome everything. He's come. A lot of the players have really dedicated the season to Oscar Lindblom. But I want to touch on another guy you just mentioned there was Sean Couturier, a finalist for the Selke Trophy. What is the perspective from the league as a whole on a guy like Sean Couturier? Because, here in Philadelphia, a lot of times people talk about, Giroux and Voracek, but a guy like Couturier, you could argue, might be the most important guy on the ice from night to night.
Well, I tell you what, Josh, I mean, he was a leading scorer in the Quebec Major Junior Hockey League at one point. So I think we always knew that the offensive side of the game was going to be there with Sean Couturier. We also know, of course, he had the bloodlines. His dad, Sylvain, played in the NHL, albeit briefly. But Sean's actually a guy, as we've seen, that has really grown in leaps and bounds the past couple of years. The type of guy you can play in every conceivable situation. He's a big-bodied guy that can certainly match up against any guy in the league when it comes to taking draws and to playing the defensive side of the game. But I think it's the offense, too, that's been there for him for the most part also, trailing just Travis Konechny on the team in terms of scoring. So we've seen the all-around game just really take shape for Couturier here the past couple of years. I think that's a lot for Flyers fans to get excited about. Does he have enough right now to win the Selke at this stage? Or going up against PB37, Patrice Bergeron, and Ryan O'Reilly, is he just sort of kind of waiting his time for his moment in the sun? Because when you look at Bergeron, whenever he's healthy, he's been productive. He's also the type of guy that plays in every conceivable situation. There's a reason why he's been nominated now like 9 straight seasons, which is remarkable. That's Pavel Datsyuk-like, I think, when you look at what Patrice Bergeron's done. Couturier, though, just such a key part. You're right up front in leading that Flyers attack and then being defensively responsible to boot.
I'm curious because you mentioned about Bergeron, how many times he's been nominated. Sometimes in the NBA they talk about, for example, well, so-and-so won an award X number of times. There's an attitude that you need to give someone else a chance. So is that happen in hockey too, where sometimes a guy gets nominated to win awards so many times, but then the voters are like, all right, he's gotten enough times. We got to give it to somebody else.
Yeah, it's almost sometimes the opposite, I find, Josh, that, it's like the Pro Bowl voting, right? I mean, you see guys going to the Pro Bowl and you're thinking, well, that guy was great a couple of years ago, but he didn't necessarily have that type of season this season that should have had him in the Pro Bowl. It's almost like by reputation. I think people instinctively say, well, you know what, and this is not to respect any player who's been nominated year after year after year, but sometimes it's sort of without even, opening up the book, you're kind of making the determination as to who it is or what kind of season he had because of the reputation that has preceded him. So I think when you've done it as long and as well and as consistently well as Patrice Bergeron has done, as long as you stay healthy for the most part and you put up numbers, everybody knows what you are as a defensive player, as a guy who can win key faceoffs. I think that goes a long, long way. So I could see it both ways. I can see sometimes it's reputation that has a guy automatically nominated for an NHL award. I also think, to your point as well, that people like to kind of filter in some new kids on the block a little bit there. I just don't know if the time for Couturier is right now. I think it's probably still going to go to Patrice Bergeron when it's all said and done, but Couturier is far from done in terms of having his name up for Selke consideration. This is something that I think we're going to have to get used to for years to come.
Scott Laughlin joining us here on the Boardwalk on the Hotline on 97.3 ESPN. Make sure to follow him on Twitter at Laughlin SXM, SiriusXM NHL Radio. Scott, then the big picture question with the Flyers is about the Eastern Conference. Yeah, they're one of the four teams, but how do they match up versus the other three teams? Because we know Tampa, Boston, Washington, we know their pedigree, but how do the Flyers compare to those three?
Boy, that's a great question. I can't wait to find out the answer to this, Josh. And look, I mean, Philadelphia's had such a remarkable season. Alain Vigneault couldn't have scripted it any better than has transpired for this team. Again, I talked about the transition from, the older guard like Claude Giroux and Jake Voracek to Travis Konecny, who went to the All-Star Weekend in St. Louis, and Sean Couturier up for the Selke Trophy, the emergence of Provorov and Sanheim on the blue line, the insulation that was provided by Chuck Fletcher when he brought in the likes of Justin Braun and Matt Niskanen, who've made such a difference on the back end. And then, of course, what they expected to get from Carter Hart, they generally have received from Carter Hart. So, look, I mean, they're going to have to play well, certainly. I still probably like Boston, I think, Josh, to win the Eastern Conference again. I think they've got a lot of unfinished business here that they were close to, finalizing in the regular season. They hope to pick up where they left off, and they've got a whole lot of know-how and veteran pedigree on that Boston club that I think is going to serve them well here in terms of paying attention to detail and such in a rather unique situation that we're about to find ourselves in with watching games in empty arenas and that sort of thing. So, look, Philadelphia's in the mix. I mean, they're one of the top four seeds. They're in the bye round for a reason. I think if they play to their capability, we saw that when the pandemic hit, unexpectedly, Josh, that they were one of the hottest teams in the league. I believe they lost their final game before they went to the break, but before that, they were on that remarkable run. So it's incumbent upon them to, I think, take the bye round games seriously. And I think each team's going to do it, but we also heard Bruce Cassidy say that because we're in the bye round, because we do have some wiggle room, they may sit a player or two when it comes to the bye round, because you're playing for reseeding. As they say, eventually you'll have to beat the best teams anyway. I think Philadelphia is that team, though, that they showed that once they got some momentum, they got the ball rolling in the right direction, a very formidable opponent for sure. And I think that'll be the case once we get to the round of 16 in the playoffs.
Scott, one more for you before we get out of here, and that is, I'm curious about the teams 5 through 12, some very intriguing matchups there in the round robin. Which of those teams 5 through 12 could really shake up everything? Because how many times have we seen it? Teams like the LA Kings and others, you're an 8 seed, you still have a chance to win the cup. Well, who's the team in the Eastern Conference in that 5 to 12 range? And if they get through, they could really shake up and just rock the world of those top 4 teams.
Well, I know Flyers fans, Josh, don't want to hear this, but I'd be afraid of the New York Rangers because I think they're far ahead of their schedule. I think they've got a Hart Trophy nominee, certainly in Artemi Panarin. The Breadman has come in as advertised for sure. I think the Rangers have a young and developing blue line. I think that they've got enough scoring up front. Zibanejad has really emerged, and I think will be the next captain of the Rangers when push comes to shove. They've got a 3-headed monster in goal. I think Shesterkin is probably going to take the keys to the car now from the King Lundqvist. But this is what probably scares Canes fans the most, I think, Josh. The Rangers are 31-6 against Carolina dating back to February of 2011. So 31-6 against the Canes going back to February of 2011. Now, the guy who's been in net for most, if not all of those victories has been Lundqvist. We saw before the break, though, the King had pretty much lost his throne, and Igor Shesterkin was the guy who had kind of taken control of that situation. I think, and David Quinn, the Rangers head coach, said earlier today that they're not going to announce their starter for that series against Carolina until the day before, perhaps even the day of game number 1 against the Canes. I think that ultimately his decision is going to be to go to Igor Shesterkin, who's won 10 of his first 12 NHL starts, has come from the Continental Hockey like Ilya Sorokin's going to do for the New York Islanders. And I think that Shesterkin's about ready to take control of this situation with the Rangers for the next decade or so. And that's why I think the Rangers are dangerous, because of all the reasons that mentioned. They're also a team that once they get rolled, I think they will in Carolina. I think they're going to roll into that round of 16 with a whole lot of momentum.
He's Scott Laughlin. Make sure you follow him on Twitter at Laughlin SXM, SiriusXM, NHL Radio. All guests he appeared right here on the Boardwalk Honda Hotline. Scott, always appreciate the time, and I'm sure we'll be touching base as the hockey pucks actually start hitting the ice and we get to see some of the results of some of this action.
I can't wait, Josh. Thanks for having me as always.
Absolutely. Appreciate you jumping on. Josh Hennig here on 97.3 ESPN. Gotta love some great hockey talk here on a Thursday. I got Brode sitting over here, big smile on his face. I know he's all amped up for everything that's going on. 609-403-0973 to get on the conversation. One segment coming in next to finish up the hour right here on 97.3 ESPN FM and the 97.3 ESPN mobile app, powered by First Bank of Sea Isle City. Welcome back into the warm-up. Josh Hennig here on 97.3 ESPN. Wrapping up the hour right now. I want to remind you that tomorrow is your opportunity to get on this Seize the Deal opportunity. Of course, weekly offers each and every week this month right here on 97.3 ESPN. And tomorrow's another one, a $50 gift card, the Dockside Cafe, for half the price. That's Dockside Cafe on South Green Street on the historic Tuckerton Creek. Tomorrow, 9 a.m., this deal goes live. Of course, you want more information, tap on the 97.3 ESPN mobile app so you can get your hands starting tomorrow on this $50 gift card for half the price at Dockside Cafe. You know, last week, the Dickey's Barbecue sold out by around like 5 p.m.-ish last week, so you don't want to miss out on this great deal. Seize the deal opportunity. Make sure you tap on the 97.3 ESPN mobile app for more information. Text board is open, 609-403-0973. Again, coming up on the Sports Bash, Daryl Reynolds, D-Ray, joins the guys every Thursday, as he does at 3 p.m. to talk Sixers and NBA. Football at 4 with NFL insider Adam Kaplan, powered by Inside the Birds podcast. Bob Wankel joins the guys from Crossing Ball to talk some Phillies coming up at 5 o'clock. And I'll announce it on the air. Yoran Weitzman of Bleacher Report will also be joining the show coming up at 5:30 p.m. So a jam-packed Sports Bash today on 97.3 ESPN. And just to follow up on a programming note, as Mike Gill announced yesterday on yesterday's Sports Bash, this will be the last week for the warm-up show. Starting on August 10th, I will be moving to post Sports Bash, but pre-game action for your Sixers, Flyers, NFL games, and more. Game night will begin August 10th on 97.3 ESPN. So I'll be moving from the 1 to 2 to the 6 to 7 slot. So we got a little shuffling of the deck here at 97.3, but we're very excited about it. Very, very cool opportunity. But this is the final week for the 1 to 2 slot, and then August 10th will officially be launching game night here in South Jersey with myself, Josh Hennig, right here on 97.3 ESPN. So I'm not going anywhere. I'm just still here. I'm just at a different time. That's all. Just a shuffling. It's a move around. So before we get out of here, I wanted to follow up on something that Scott Laughlin said that I thought was very interesting, which was he talked about how, the Flyers, he thinks that Boston should be the favorite in the Eastern Conference, but he also said that the Flyers have the kind of team that can challenge the other teams in the Eastern Conference. And I thought it was interesting that he did not say the Flyers have no chance. Like, he wasn't selling them down the river and saying, oh, this team doesn't have a chance. He was saying, look, Boston may be the favorite, but Philadelphia is there in it. And he mentioned, listen, if Sean Couturier and Travis Konechny and Carter Hart play well, wait a minute. I didn't hear Claude Giroux's name. I didn't hear him mention Voracek a bunch of times. He's mentioning the other guys. And I think that's significant because that means this Flyers team has finally evolved. We finally got past the point where if Claude Giroux and Jake Voracek don't play well, there's no chance of you winning. The fact that somebody who covers the NHL at large is pointing to other guys on the team as key players for the Flyers' success should excite you because of the fact that that's telling you that the Flyers have more depth than they've ever had in the past several years. You know, one of the reasons why this team hasn't won a playoff series in the last few years is because, no offense to the guys who have been here over the years, but this team just hasn't had the depth. They haven't had the firepower. They haven't had the goaltending. And now, people who cover the NHL, that's all they do, are saying, hey, Sean Couturier, Travis Konechny, they're going to be important. It's a breath of fresh air to hear that you need other guys on this team to do their job for this team to continue to be successful. That means the Flyers' success is not dependent on Claude Giroux scoring goals or getting assists. Yeah, you want him to score goals and get assists, but if he doesn't, you're not dead in the water. That's progress. Coming up next, I mentioned the Sports Bash. They got Sixers talk with Daryl Reynolds at 3. Football at 4 with Adam Kaplan, NFL insider, Bob Wankel on the Phillies, and more coming up. Mike Gill, Hunter Brody in the house. Next.